In 1750 or so, Jonathan Edwards, who was the great pastor of the First Great Awakening, which was one of the main revivals that gripped the United States of America, North America, and was the first great revival as the colonies were forming and the United States was becoming a nation. Jonathan Edwards was the great pastor over that revival, over that awakening. And in 1750, about 9 years after the revival broke out, Edwards wrote a letter to one of his acquaintances to explain what happened that sparked the revival. And he writes about a meeting that he had in the summer of 1741. He called together the young people in the church to meet in a house, and Edwards, their pastor, began to speak to the young people in his congregation about the great things of God. And as he described this meeting to his friend over 9 years later, he said, "That is when the young people in our congregation began to cry out to the Lord." From that meeting, there was continued growth in the young people in the church, and even the children gathered together and they stopped playing outside and they stopped doing the things that they were accustomed to do, that students are often accustomed to do, and they began to meet together to fast and to pray that the Lord would move. We've been talking about revival, and I'm saying that a revival is a mighty and a wonderful work of God where the lost are saved and the saved are sanctified in surprising numbers. It is a work of God. We can't save anybody, you and I can't. We can't, no matter how much we want, we can't reach out and touch someone's heart and turn it so they will believe. We can't reach out and shake someone's heart so that they will grow. It is the Lord that has to do that. But there are a few things that we can do, and one of those things is to pray. We can't move the human heart, but we can pray to the one who holds our hearts in his hands. And we learn from Edwards and we learn from Acts that prayer is the spark for a great movement of God. If you want to have a revival, and we need to have a revival, then one of the things it is going to take is prayer. There will never be any revival without God's people gathering together in prayer. It's true throughout history. It's true in the book of Acts. And in this passage that we read today, in this chapter, we see several crucial lessons on prayer that we better get together if we are going to have a hope of revival in our day. The first thing I want you to see from Acts chapter 4 about prayer is that in opposition, the people prayed. In opposition, the people pray. We must pray in opposition. One of the things we have talked about over and again is the fact that whenever there is a great and a mighty and a wonderful work of God, it always follows upon some horrible season, some difficulty that the people of God are enduring. That is on purpose. One of the things that the opposition does to us, one of the things that difficulty creates in us is a longing that something has to change. That's the way it's supposed to work. Difficulty right before revival is all about creating a sense of prayer in the hearts of God's people. But sometimes opposition does not create that sense of prayer in us, does it? Sometimes opposition, instead of creating a spirit of prayer, it pushes us into ourselves. We get ingrown and we get depressed and we get worried and we get angry and we shake our fists at what's going on out there. Sometimes opposition doesn't make us necessarily reach into ourselves. It makes us reach out to others, and we're looking for somebody else to help. We're looking for a human being to help. We're looking for a political party to help. We're looking for a gathering to help. We're looking for some kind of plan or some kind of program to help, to do something. This is bad and it can't last. Something has to change. Something needs to fix it, and we look within or we look without. But the apostles and the early church, in the midst of the revival that was the creation of the early church, they don't look within, and they don't even necessarily look without. They look up. They speak to heaven. Peter and John are in a mess. They have preached the gospel. They have seen thousands of people come to Christ, and for their faithfulness, they spent a night in the slammer. For their faithfulness, they are hauled in front of the religious authorities, the same trial, by the way, the same group of people that would have convicted and crucified Jesus. They're hauled before that same group of people, and they're like, what do you think you're doing? What are you doing healing people and talking about Jesus? That's some significant opposition. And what do? They get together, verse 23 says, with their friends. And verse 24 says, when they heard it, they lifted their voices together to God. If we take our cues from the early church, we won't look within and we won't look without to other people. We will lift our voices to God. Opposition ought to make us pray. And that prayer ought to excite us, that even that difficulty ought to excite us because of who we're praying to.